Chapter 5. The first 2 years with Anna were for me years of complete pleasure. Years of pride and of amusement in the things that she said and the things that she done. People often said, "Guess what Anna said today?" or "Guess what Anna did this morning?" And I'd chuckle at the audacity of the child. The gap of years that separated Anna and me was a good place to laugh from. That laughter was warm and loving. The laughter was, after all, a little higher up the ladder of understanding, and one can afford to be generous from these high places. The ladder was crowded. We were all forging ahead for one reason or another. We had all of us wrestled with our various problems. We had solved them to some extent. Of course, we could chuckle. Of course, we could be generous. We could, from our elevated position, give advice to those struggling below. This was the first 2 years. Though they weren't exactly wasted years, Anna cast her pearls about, and I picked up a very good many of them, but not all of them. I left too many of them lying about, and the feet of 30 years had trodden them into the ground. I'm told that every second of our life is somehow registered in the brains. I find that a comforting thought. But in what chamber, in what convolution do these pearls lie? I've never found the key to unlocking these memories. But sometimes it happens. I'd find another pearl, some happening or some word, and the memory would come back. I shudder to think that for 2 years I was content to eat the stale bread of learning, when right under my nose Anna was busy baking new and crusty ideas. I suppose I thought that the loaf ought to look like a loaf. To me, a loaf and bread was synonymous, and at that time I hadn't the sense to see the difference. In some part of my mind I can still detect a feeling of shame, a flicker of anger, and a sense of wasted time from that moment when I realised that the important word was bread, that bread could be baked into an infinity of shapes. I hadn't the sense to see that the shape of the loaf had nothing to do with the food value of the bread. The shape was nothing but a convenience. But my education had been too much concerned with the shapes. At odd moments I'd find myself angered when I asked the question, how much of what I was taught was a matter of convenience? But I asked nobody. There's nobody there to give me an answer. What a stupid waste of time even to ask such a question. The question lies ahead of me, not behind me. Anna has left her map of discovery behind, some parts pretty thoroughly explored, some parts only hinted at, but most parts of the map have arrows of direction on them. The evening I discovered the nature of my relationship to Anna was the same evening I began to grasp what she was, or at least to see the way she worked. It was early winter and dark. We had the kitchen to ourselves, and the shutters were closed. The gas lamps hissed its light into the room. The kitchen range, newly banked up with coal, spluttered its erratic candles of flame through the fire bars. On the kitchen table, a half-finished radio set, boxes of bits and pieces, and methylated spirit lamp, a soldering iron, and a clutter of tools, valves, and what have you. Anna was kneeling on a chair, elbows on the table, her chin resting in her cupped hands. I was at the opposite end of the table, my attention divided, like a gall, into 3 parts: the radio set I was making, Anna, and the shadows on the wall. As the coal in the kitchen grate warmed up, the trapped gases escaped and ignited. The brilliant flame imprinted Anna's shadow onto the wall, exhausted itself, and went out. Another took its place and cast another shadow. The explanation was simple enough, but the effect somehow defied the explanation. The shadow was there by the picture, then it was there by the doorway, then there on the curtains. The The shadow pulsated in the flame as if it had a life of its own. It vanished and appeared somewhere else. There was no movement between one position and another. It came and went. It looked, how can I say it? It looked as if the shadow was playing. My eyes moved from one shadow to another, then to 3 at the same time, and then nothing. A few seconds later, 2 shadows. Something itched deep inside me, but too deep to look at. Anna looked up, saw, and grinned. The merry-go-round inside me whirled, but nothing happened. Whatever had nudged had disappeared, leaving behind a hole in some part of me. The radio grew bit by bit in silence, except for the sizzle of the soldering iron as it was plunged into the flux. Tests were made, and at last the valves were plugged in and the batteries connected. A last look, and we switched it on. And nothing. It was just one of those things which happen from time to time. The meter set to the right voltage range, 1 or 2 measurements. That's probably the fault. Unsolder this, set the meter current reading to that, insert the meter to the circuit, and then switch on. Of course, it was just one of those silly mistakes, soon rectified. Anna's hand was on mine, her brow furrowed in thought. "What you done with that?" She pointed to the meter. "I've just found out what's wrong. Please do it all again." She wasn't looking at me. Her eyes were riveted on the meter. "From where you used that just now." "Do you mean to put the fault back after I've taken all this trouble to find it?" She nodded. So I put the fault back. "Now what?" I asked. "Now do what you did before, but talk," she commanded. "But sweetie," I cried, "if I talk about what I'm doing, you won't be able to understand a word." "Don't want to understand no words. It's something different." First, I set this meter reading voltage to this range. Then I attached the meter across this resistance to measure the voltage at this point. My finger stabbed at the various bits as I spoke their names. Now we moved down to here and to do the same thing all over again, and the meter registers the right voltage. Getting to the faulty part, I hooked up the meter, and Anna noted that the meter reading was very different. "That's where it is," I exclaimed. "Now, if I unsolder this bit here and put the meter reading current to just there, we'll see what happens." I unsoldered, saying, "Now we put the meter in the circuit, and Bob's your uncle. No current." The hands came forward again, and I nodded. She unhooked the leads carefully and slowly hooked them back again. No current. Replacing the faulty part, I switched on again, made a few adjustments, and listened to the music. Some time after 2 o'clock in the morning, I was awakened by the clack-clack of the curtain rings. By the light of the street lamp, I could see Anna standing there. It was strange how the noise of those curtain rings always kept me wide awake. Strange, considering the fact that we almost slept on the railway lines with the express trains running in one ear and out of the other. But the slightest jingle of those runners and I was wide awake. After 2 years, Bossy and Patch had elected themselves as Anna's bodyguards, a kind of advance guard scouting out the possible dangers that might harm their little mistress. Bossy, the old show-off, always found a way in, and had already landed on my chest, while Patch, with lesser courage, excused himself by continually looking back to see if Anna was still coming. "You awake, Finn?" "What's up, Titch?" "Full up." "Oh?" A little sob brought the guards tramping up my chest in order to size up the situation. The sniffs lasted a few minutes longer whilst I thumbed through the events of the past days or so, trying to figure out the possible reasons for the tears. "Did you put it in the middle?" she asked last night. Did I put what in the middle?" "The bit at the end when you undid it." "Oh, yes," I remembered. "When I unsoldered the circuit." Yes, did you put the box in the middle? Yes, I said, getting the drift of the conversation. I suppose it was like putting it in the middle. Why? Well, it's funny. Hilarious, I admitted. But how is it funny? Like church and Mr. God. Oh, sure, that is funny, that is. But it is, true, it is. At 2 o'clock in the morning, my brain cogs are apt to be a little slow in reacting. Obviously, this was one of those times. Fueling up to meet this situation meant getting up, and as it was too darn cold, I lit a fag. The fumes hit my brain, and I coughed awake my engine. I put my brain into bottom gear. Right. The church and Mr. God being like repairing a radio was obviously going to be a tough hill to climb, and at that time in the morning I wasn't sure where my brakes were. Nothing was going to stop it. So I resigned myself to the inevitable. I invited her to proceed with, all right, so going to church is like mending a radio, I agree. I agree, only tell me about it slowly, nice and slowly. Well, first you put the box outside, then you put the box inside. That's like people in church. They keep outside and they ought to go inside. I wish you'd tell me exactly what's happened. Thin it out a bit so I can understand. Her body relaxed as her mind sorted out suitable and simple phrases, easy enough for an adult to understand. When you first done it with the box, why? To measure the voltage. Outside. Of course, you measure voltages outside the circuit. Then the last time you done it, what was that? Was that to measure current? Inside? Yes, inside. You have to get inside the circuit to measure the current. That's like people and church, innit? She knew full well that I ain't got it, so she continued. People, she paused to let this sink in, when they go to church, another lengthy pause, measure Mr. God from the outside. She hacked at my shins with her toes in order to stress this point. They don't get inside and measure Mr. God. She waited patiently, waited to see if these ideas had caught fire somewhere. Out in the night, the Continental Express hurled its way towards Liverpool Street Station and bed. Its whistle shrieked out its desire for sleep. Flashing past our bedroom window, it dropped its whistle a couple of semitones, acknowledging my presence, hissing and laughing at my confusion. Sleepy Pullman cars chanted their lullaby, diddly-dum, diddly-dee, diddly-dee, suck it and see, suck it and see. Everything was having a go at me this night. I did suck it and see. At least a couple of brain cells rubbed together and nudged the firefly of my imagination awake. Not enough to really see by, but something was there. I'd been reading Aquinas recently, and he'd made no reference to making a radio. So I asked him to move over a bit and make room for Anna. I asked a question here and there, and the answer gradually got pieced together. As a supposed Christian, you can stand outside and measure Mr. God. The meter doesn't read voltage, it reads loving, kindness, all-powerful, omnipotent, etc. You have a nice lot of labels to stick about the place. So far, so good. So now, what's the next step? Oh yes, now I open up the Christian circuit and pop me the meter inside. Seems simple enough. Nothing to it, really. Hey, wait a blessed minute. Who was it that said, be like your heavenly Father? Quiet that man, I've nearly solved the problem. If I'm inside the Christian circuit, then I'm a real part of Mr. God, a working part of Mr. God. You mean I can